You're listening to a special presentation from Night of the Living podcast, Zoned Out with Freddie and Joe. What's up, Joe?
Hello, Freddie.
We've got
How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
I'm still here. I look out and I see my hand. I have a reflection. How about you?
These are good things. I'm slowly but surely making my way after several weeks over this whatever thing I had, this chest sinus whatever thing, but still a little lingering. So
Yikes.
It's hung on for a few weeks now. Anyway,
Did you catch it in the Pacific?
I think I did.
Yeah.
I had a beautiful vacation with my beautiful girlfriend to a beautiful land called Kauai in Hawaii, which I'd never been to before, and it was amazing and fantastic, and the snorkeling was great. And then I think I brought some small creatures back in my nose or something.
Yeah, you can never be too careful. You might have got one of those cursed, like the little cursed tiki idol, like Greg Brady.
With a fro cut. Yeah. Oh, no, you were Greg Brading. I was Simpsons.
Same diff. The
right,
Frogurt is also cursed.
Right.
I was thinking
That's
of a
bad.
little older than that. Like there's always those weird episodes of the Brady Bunch where I think there's 2 or 3 of them where they end up like kind of in like a little thriller.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
It's a
Vincent
little
Price turns
drama.
up.
And
Yeah. That show was a good time.
I love it.
But we're
when
kind
Vincent
of
Price turns up.
going back again. We're back to December 11th, 1959, and When the Sky Was Opened. Did I get the title
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
That's correct.
So it's another one with 14 cast members, including Serling. So 13's popped back up because, you don't count Serling. He's not counting himself. No. I give up on the numerological stuff for the series now. It's out of
Moving
control.
on.
Yep. So this is the first of 16 episodes based on stories by Richard Matheson. And they changed a lot. Really, it's just basically the concept of people kind of disappearing was the thing.
Yeah.
But if you read the original story and watch this episode, you'll see there's not a lot of other material that they have in common. But
Okay.
but it's important because it's his first time. They move on to do Nick of Time with Shatner with the fortune telling machine. That's Richard
sure.
Matheson. Little Girl Lost, which was the inspiration for Poltergeist.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, where the little girl just kind of disappears under her bed, and they can hear her voice, but the parents can't find her.
Oh, of course. Now that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so when they wrote Poltergeist, it was kind of like an adaptation of that story, blown out to a much larger scale. He did Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, another great Shatner episode.
Wow, that was him? I didn't realize that Matheson wrote that one.
Yeah, and he did
That's such a classic now.
Night Call, too, is just the one with the old lady getting the calls in the middle of the night. Do you remember that?
I don't. I'm looking forward to there's a whole bunch of these that I'm like, I kind of remember, I remember a nugget of it or some portion of the twist or something like that. But I'm kind of enjoying these revisiting to go, oh, that's where that, meme or thought or thing came from.
Yeah, if you look at the arch of the Matheson Twilight Zone stuff, just a couple years before this, he had written The Incredible Shrinking Man, which was kind of a pretty decent success, and
Sure.
It kind of put him on the map. And but then you see in the 80s what he's doing is writing the screenplay for Jaws 3D. So you kind of see the arc of his career,
Yeah.
But yeah,
He's cashing in a bit at the end there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Huge influence on Stephen King. Matheson was just a great storyteller.
Yeah. What I like about his stories is there's definitely an element of more horror to it to me. That fear stuff rather than the supernatural or the wondrous, in some of these other ones. You get something just a little bit darker, and that seems to stand out as a feature of his shows or a lot of his stories.
I Am Legend, which I kind of glossed over. That's probably the one most people know him for.
Right. And I think maybe, was it last week or the week before when we had an episode, we talked a little bit about some of his catalog of
Yeah, well,
written works.
we also talked about, and this happens sometimes, I'll get them mixed up, Charles Beaumont, who's another writer who did, who's probably like the biggest contributing writer to the series. But Richard Matheson did 16 episodes, but you also got to, in the scale of things, when you look at the series, and I don't know if we just brought him up because we were teasing this episode, maybe. My memory is terrible, but yeah, I do kind of remember you and I talking about The Last Man on Earth, and there being all these adaptations.
Well, Vincent Price, and there's all the different versions of it. Right. Maybe that was a reference back to maybe we were just kind of foreshadowing of the next episode, and I think
my middle-aged brain just conflates everything.
Exactly. I'm sure the people who are listening are like, "Oh, we just listened to that episode, and clearly you've forgotten already." Yes, we have.
Yeah,
sorry,
it's true. So he also did some other episodes of other series and stuff, anthology series, Richard Matheson. So if you don't know his work, I would say both Charles Beaumont and Richard Matheson are worth like finding print stories by those authors because they're both really great. The director who came on for this one is Douglas Hayes, who ended up doing 9 episodes, and he is really, really good. And some of the stuff in this is wild. The angles and the decision to have the lead like burst through a friggin' window just to make a point, just show how angry he is and frustrated.
Oh, was it last week we had the burst through the window with was it? I think it was last week, wasn't it?
Last week, that was the one Per Chance to Dream.
The first No, so it was 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Okay, Per Chance to Dream. That's right.
Where he yeeted himself out the window is, I think, the expression, right?
I wouldn't call what happened this time yeeting, but we'll get to that later. It's
a lot more like hulking out, is what I thought of when
That's
it happened.
a perfect example. Of course, if you watch the episode, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. But yeah.
So this director Douglas Hayes. Now he did episodes like After Hours, which is the one with the mannequin in the you know what I'm talking about. After Hours is the department store after they close and the mannequins come to life. Spoiler alert. The Howling Man, which is one of my favorite episodes. It's really kind of a creepy one. Eye of the Beholder, which is the one with the bandages and the pig face doctors.
Uber classic,
yeah, definitely like an iconic. And the Invaders, which is a great episode, but also I don't know how many people consider it like one of the most memorable ones. But he directed that, and he plays an astronaut in it too. One of the astronauts. Yeah, I love the twist.
Is that that's that I'm thinking of. Which I don't want to give anything away. That's my mom's favorite episode.
The Giants
is that one.
There's like we're in a land of giants. Yeah, it's a great episode.
Yeah.
Now, Douglas Hayes also wrote and directed like dozens of TV series. He was huge.
Awesome.
Do you want to get into kind of a brief synopsis?
Yeah. So this was one I hadn't remembered this one, and I was really delighted by it because I tell you what, if you haven't watched these, the ability to go into a show like this and see it for the first time and kind of, some of them feel like they have a rather simple twist. And nowadays, because so many of these have been repeated, you might see the twist coming. Some of them you look at and you're like, I don't know what's going on, just like anybody else. Like the characters are doing the same thing. So this is one of those for me where I was like, I don't know what's happening other than what had happened last week in the kind of the
teaser,
the teaser, thank you, from Serling in the episode, which was like somebody blinks out. I was like, okay. So it starts out and the intro is given over a hangar. You can see like an airplane covered by a tarp in there. And I'm just going to do the intro just because it lays out a lot of the early data, that kind of exposition. It says, her name X-20, her type an experimental interceptor. Recent history, a crash landing in the Mojave Desert. After a 31-hour flight, 900 miles into space. Incidental data. The ship, with the men who flew her, disappeared from the radar for 24 hours. And then it cuts into a scene, which is really interesting because I think that might be the first time this has happened in an intro. And a nurse introduces or meets one of these military pilots. And then as the pilot goes to go check into a room, this is just like a couple lines of conversation. The the intro picks up again, the voiceover, and says, "But the shrouds that cover mysteries are not always made out of tarpaulin, as this man will soon find out, but on the other side of a hospital door, or find out on the other side of a hospital door." Then he opens the door. So I thought that was interesting, just as a kind of a background note, that it seems like this is the first time I remember that they split the intro like that.
Yeah, and they worked it into the scene.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, so that actor's Rod Taylor, the one who's the visiting astronaut.
Looks like Bill Pullman to me.
You know, I saw a lot of Robin Williams in him too.
Ooh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Could see that.
yeah, depending on the angle. He's an Australian actor. Can't tell. Flawless.
Yeah.
Flawless accent.
Really, totally.
Do you remember he was Winston Churchill in Inglourious Bastards? He looked completely different. He showed he aged a lot, but
I don't even remember Winston Churchill in Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah, you should watch it again. It's I want to say it's the scene. Wasn't Mike Myers in that scene too? Maybe.
Yeah.
I think it's the same.
Okay,
scene.
I know the Mike Myers scene with what's his face, Magneto. That guy.
I need to revisit that movie.
But, yeah, I don't remember Churchill being in that one, but I must have just missed it in the background. Sometimes I don't.
Big part of it. It was. It wasn't a huge deal. Given how much is happening in that movie. That movie's so wild.
There's so much in that movie.
He was Mitch Brenner in The Birds. So like that's probably the biggest thing,
Yeah.
And then he played H.G. Wells in The Time Machine, and he was the voice of Pongo in 101 Dalmatians.
Who's okay? I'm not a big Disney animated. The modern ones, yes, Pixar and all that. But the old classics, a bunch of them I haven't even watched. So who is Pongo?
I want to say Pongo is the dad of the dogs. It's funny that
you said Pongo, and I thought Oingo Boingo.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Pongo is the father of the puppies.
Okay,
I'd say 99% sure of that. I haven't seen that movie since I was a kid, though.
Interesting.
And it's not like, for me, it's not one of my favorite Disney movies when it comes to their animation. I mean, I like the animation, but Cruella de Vil making a code out of dogs is almost too much for me. I know I watch a lot of horror films, but I'm like, okay, I don't want to keep thinking about her making a code out of all these little puppies, man.
Just go back to Mr. Burns and making his vest. Yeah.
Be my vest. So yeah, he's visiting his buddy Gart in the military hospital.
Yeah, so he walks in and he's checking on Gart, and you can see he's a little distraught, but it's not clear why or anything. He looks a little unsure and scattered. And I'm going to name them by their last names. Before I do that, I want to point out something which is really interesting. No, but I don't yet. I'll point it out in a second. Sorry, taking it back. ADHD kicking in. So this guy, the main guy, Forbes, is the one who goes into the room, and he offers Gart, who's in the bed, a cigarette in a hospital, which I love that. Probably military hospital to do whatever they want, I guess.
And 59.
And he's trying to talk him through what happened, like what's going on, and he's a little distraught. And you're like, what's going on? What happened? He's reading the newspaper headline, and he's showing the Gart in the bed. He's like, look at this headline. Look at this newspaper. What do you see? And he's like, it's a story of two intrepid pilots going on a mysterious journey into space. And he's like, that's what you remember, huh? You and me and the X-20 taking off, but an hour up in we say about 4 hours in, we black out, and 24 hours later, we end up in a crashed aircraft in the desert. We don't know where we've been or what's happened. Is that right? And Gart's like, yeah. And Forbes looks down, and Gart's like, what? Now, what's the matter? Isn't that right? And Forbes comes across and he's like, Bill, there were 3 of us in that aircraft, you and me and a colonel named Harrington. And Gart's like, oh yeah, Harrington, sure, whatever, man. And Forbes is like, Ed Harrington, now look, he's 36 years old. He's my best friend. I've known him for 15 years and you've known him for 5. And he leans in and he's like, that ship took a crew of 3 and we were the 3. and it was you, what was it? And there were 3 of us when they brought us back to the hospital after picking us up in the desert. You and me and Harrington. Harrington and I were just scratched, but you were the one with the busted leg. Yesterday morning, they discharged Harrington and me. There were 3 beds in this room, yours and mine and Harrington's. And Gart's like, Clegg, which is this guy's first name, which I've never heard that before. Clegg Forbes. Okay. Mm-hmm. He's like, Clegg, I don't know anybody named Harrington. He wasn't on the crew with us. The X-20 carried 2 men, you and me. Nobody named Harrington, nobody else at all. When you walked out of here yesterday morning, you walked out alone. There's never been 3 beds in this room, only 2. Forbes starts freaking out. He's like, so he starts, yeah. Harrington. We'll get to that. So he's like, look, I'm going to explain to you all the exact words that you used and what you said and exactly what happened in chronological order. And which is interesting about this too, that the format of how they did it, starting with this middle part of the story, then they jump to a flashback, and then they come back to this middle part, like you kind of chronologically make it there.
What was the flashback to?
The flashback then right after this is what happened that morning, according to Clegg's or Forbes's memory.
Yeah.
Right. So they kind of do the fade out to flashback, and basically this is Forbes telling the story to Gart about what happened and in the way he remembers it chronologically, which is kind of cool that he said he specifically said chronologically in the show. He does go back, starts at the beginning, chronologically goes to where they are now, and then they move forward from there. So it's kind of a cool.
It's funny that it was so smooth of a transition. It didn't really register to me as a memorable thing. But yeah, now that you mention it, that was uncommon at the time, I think. To shuffle your narrative that way.
Exactly, starting in the middle and going from there. So this jumps to a flashback of Harrington and Forbes in the hospital room, and they're joking around, and it's Harrington who's standing up next to Forbes. And what I realized at this point, they're kind of joking around and this and that. And I was like, they listed their ranks. And so I looked up their ranks and what their ranks are in the Air Force and how they seniority, how they rank. And the one named Harrington, who's the one that they're talking about has disappeared, was the highest ranked one. The next one was Forbes, and then Gart. And you can kind of see it in their interaction. I thought that was kind of interesting about the way the actors did this, because they're like, they were more respectful to the higher ranked person, and the higher ranked person had a little bit more play with them in their seniority. So I don't know. It was an interesting dynamic that I think the actors recognized and used to like when somebody was more superior talking to a less superior person, they could be as loose and as crazy as they wanted. And then when the less superior person was talking, they're like, look, you're acting crazy. Yeah. I'm speaking to you calmly, So it was interesting dynamic.
The guy who played Harrington. Yeah. He comes back in Little Girl Lost as the physicist. He's kind of like the Zelda Rubinstein character.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Not saying that he plays it that way, but his function in the story is the same, where he comes in to kind of help the parents of the missing little girl. But he was also like, he has 182 credits, but like he comes back as the narrator of the 80s Twilight Zone reboot.
Really? That's him
for the first 2 seasons. Yeah. He's missing Harrington.
Okay, because that dude's voice is like chilling and thrilling and all of that. It's like gravelly and oh man. If we ever end up covering the 80s episodes, there's some episodes in there that I feel like people have never seen or heard of.
Yeah.
That are so good.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm a fan of all the iterations of the Twilight Zone to one extent or another.
Awesome. Okay, so they're talking, and so they're recounting. They're going back through this narrative, and Harrington, who's the highest ranked one, is they're joking around, and then Harrington and Forbes leave. They go to a bar, and they go to sit down, and they're kind of chatting up a lady at the bar, and she's like, "What's it like out there in space?" And he's like, "It's like way out." I think he's like, "That's what the kids say, right?" Yeah. And Harrington, off to his right, is kind of got this 1,000-yard stare. And you think that maybe he's looking in the mirror behind the bar or something, but he's just kind of staring off at nothing until a match kind of burns him. And Forbes is like, "Are you sick, Ed?" And he goes, "No, I'm not sick. Just a funny feeling." What does he say? I just got a very funny feeling. Whew, I've never felt anything like this before. And Forbes is like, "What kind of feeling?" And Harrington goes, "It's like I didn't belong here. Like, if I was to let go of myself, I'd..." And Forbes is like, "You'd what?" He's like I'd disappear. And it's like, whoa, all right, that's weird. And they go to Cheers, and again, Harrington, or these might be flip flop, but they cheers, and Harrington drops his beer, and it shatters on the ground, which you're like, whoa, he's clearly not feeling well.
His 15-cent beer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What was it, 50 to 30 cents or something?
It was 30 cents for two.
Yeah. Is it still 30 cents in Earth money? He makes a joke. Wow. And so he's not feeling well. So Harrington gets up to go make a phone call, and he's calling his parents at home. And then you cut to him a moment later coming out of the phone booth, and he calls over Forbes, and he's like, "Look, I called my parents, and they didn't have any idea who I was, and they don't have a son, and they still told me to stop doing practical jokes." He's like, "I don't understand. I feel like I shouldn't be here." He goes, as if maybe he feels as if maybe we shouldn't have come back from that flight at all. Maybe something made a mistake and let us go through where we shouldn't have. So it's kind of a interesting, chilling, existential. I keep thinking of like a cosmic horror type of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
At that point.
It feels like madness. Yeah, because your parents should know who you are. There's no logical reason why any of this should happen. The music in this is really good. Like those swells in those moments, it really helps punctuate everything. That's
totally.
Leonard Rosenman. I just want to mention real quick that he did Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Nice. He did Barry Lyndon and RoboCop 2 as well, and the Ralph Bakshi animated Lord of the Rings.
It's funny. The audio for RoboCop is underrated. Like, if you go back and you listen to that, it's such a distinctive score.
Definitely
really stands out.
Well, the first one, that's what Basil Polidorus, I think, who did the Conan music. And RoboCop 2, he riffs on that a lot in the sequel. But this this composer is, if you're talking about his best known original stuff, is Barry Lyndon in The Lord of the Rings, and then sequels otherwise and TV work stuff.
Gotcha. Very cool. So Forbes is like, "You need a drink," and Harrington's kind of like startles up and then kind of settles back into this weird happy daze or something. And Forbes gets up, goes to get him a drink, and happens to glance down at a newspaper, and it zooms in and shows that 2 pilots crashed in the desert. Whereas earlier he'd seen 3 pilots, right? So he's seeing physical things change where he expects there to be a different answer. So that newspaper kind of reoccurs over and over again. And Forbes turns around, and Harrington's gone. He's not in the phone booth at all. And he's like, "Hey, where's the drink for my buddy? To replace the one that he lost." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You came in here alone." And Forbes is like, What? He's just totally doesn't get it. And he starts going, "You guys are crazy. You're crazy." Like, he can't explain it in any way. And then it cuts to him in the room, and he's kind of acting crazy. You see his collar's all undone, and he's got that kind of loose, manic look to his face. And he makes a phone call to a military base and asks for a call back from the general. And there's a knock at the door, and he's like, "Oh, Ed." He thinks it's Harrington. he goes to open it. It's his wife, Amy, and she starts chewing him out because he was supposed to meet her at a bus stop or something, and she's like laying into him, and he's like, Amy, I'm in trouble. He starts going, he starts explaining what's going on, and then he's like, oh, he said, I sent you a wire about this. So he remembers the wire, and he goes to pick up the wire that he wired her to come meet him. And he's like, look, it says I'm going to be here with Ed. He says, I'm going to, come pick me up at, and he's like, oh, like he realizes it's not me and Ed, it's just him.
Yeah.
So again, something he remembers distinctly being a clear indication that it was more than one person becomes just him. So the general calls back at that point, and he starts asking him about Harrington because they all trained there together. They all knew this general. And he starts yelling at the general, which, if you're a military guy, probably not a great idea, but he's losing it. I mean, he's just acting crazy, and he's like, you trained with us, you blah, blah, blah. And he hangs up on him. And at this point, he's at his wit's end. He thinks maybe he's back at the bar, and he's like grasping at anything. And he's kind of backing away from Amy out through the patio, and then just takes off running for the bar, thinking maybe this is all an elaborate joke.
And it's leading up to my favorite moment of the episode.
So at the bar, it's you see it from the inside looking at him, and he's outside the door, and there's these big pane windows for the doors, double doors.
Lights
and he's
are
looking
out.
Inside. Lights are out, chairs are all up. The place is closed. And he's like, Ed? Ed? Like maybe he's in there. And he starts getting madder and madder, and then
got that burst through the door. It's such a dramatic. He kind of flexes too when he gets through. He's like, Harrington.
Yes,
he does
he does.
Yeah,
the full on like raw Hulk fists together down low, popping out his yeah, all that stuff. He's like, Harrington.
That was pretty great. It's a great moment.
Yeah. It was just awesome.
Yeah, you're like, things have come to a head.
Yeah, that was like him snapping.
And he's returning to the hospital after this scene, right, to visit Gart.
Well, yeah. So what happens is he jumps through there, and then he's slowly breaking down, right? And you see him go into this almost like a childlike phase where he comes over, he knocks the chairs off one of the tables, like he's all petulant and stuff, and then he starts crying, right? I mean, it's really hitting him that he doesn't understand. And I kept thinking to myself, what are the 12 stages of grief or whatever it is, or 6 stages, or because I wonder if they're trying to really show him going through this
anger,
of like,
acceptance.
Nobody believes me.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on, right? So then it fade cuts back to him in the room with Gart, and he's like, I ran around for a while like a crazy man. I must have just left Amy, his wife, in the room. And Gart's like, look, this must be an illusion. I can't explain it, but I don't know any Harrington. And Forbes gets kind of serene.
I want to say Gart was complaining about being in the hospital, and his way of expressing that was he said, if I have one more thermometer in my puss.
Which just the language. I love, 50s.
The 50s.
It's so good.
I just had to mention that. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
Please continue.
A thermometer in my puss. So now we're back at present time, right? So this was all flashback to get to now, and now we realize why he's frustrated by the fact that there's just 2 people on the newspaper, what he's been through, and he gets this kind of serene look on his face, and he explains that he's having kind of a strange feeling, and he stands up and walks over the mirror, and he's like, no. He gets really, really charged and angry, and he's like, no, I don't want it to happen. And he runs out in the hallway, and Gart leaps up from the bed and chases after him, and he's gone.
Yeah.
And Gart's like, get a nurse. He's like, go get him, get him. And the nurse is like, who are you talking about? And he's like, the man who just, Forbes just ran out of here. She's like, there's no one out here. And you realize, suddenly Gart realizes it's just him now.
Yeah.
And he gets this look on his face, this abject fear, which I thought the actor did a pretty good job of like total terror, realizing everything that Forbes was talking about is now happening to him.
Yeah.
And he kind of falls back to his hospital bed and happens to glance at the paper and sees lone pilot goes out into space and comes back, and he's like,
I found that
and falls backward.
kind of like
Go ahead.
shocking the first time I saw it, that you have the character you're following, whose perspective this episode is from, disappears before an ancillary character does.
Yeah.
And I think that was a great choice.
It's so effective, because then you realize he's suddenly realizing everything that Forbes was going through and was experiencing. He's like, oh no, he was right. I thought he was crazy. He was right. Now I'm experiencing it. And he doesn't experience it long. He actually falls back. And again, the ranking, most superior disappears first, then the next most senior, and then the least senior
I didn't
disappears.
catch that.
And a moment later, they cut to a soldier and a nurse talking in the hallway. And they're like, oh, well, what rooms do we have available for some of these patients? Well, let's go take a look at this room. And they go to the room where Gart was just laying down. They open it up, and they're like, yep, empty. Yeah, we can put him in here. And it's just kind of like they're all gone. And then all of a sudden, they cut to a hangar that we saw at the beginning that had the tarp draped over this experimental plane, and it's just a tarp with barriers around it. There's no plane.
They're just pretending.
And we get
tarp
the outro.
now.
Exactly.
Government tarp.
And you hear, once upon a time, there was a man named Harrington, a man named Forbes, a man named Dart. They used to exist, but don't any longer. Someone or something took them somewhere. At least they are no longer a part of the memory of man. As to the X-20 supposed to be housed here in this hangar, this too does not exist. And if any of you have any questions concerning an aircraft and 3 men who flew her, speak softly of them, and only in the Twilight Zone.
They went bye-bye. I've got your nose.
They just disappeared. So what is awesome about that too, no explanation.
Yeah.
Like they went into space and something happened.
Yeah. And it leaves it to your imagination. There's no attempt to even hint at what, why, or wherefore.
Yeah. Which in some instances, when you hear a story like that, it's very unsatisfying. Whereas this was told in such a way that you're like, cosmic something, creepy.
Did you watch that Nathan Fielder show that he did with Emma Stone?
Which one is it?
I have to look up the title of it. Give me one moment. You continue.
It was like a horror one. Oh, I'll just mention right away that the next episode, lest we jump right to it next week, is going to be What You Need, which I didn't remember at all.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna. I think I watched just the beginning of it and I was like, "Yep, I don't recognize any of this." So we'll see what that one's all about. But
The Curse is the Nathan Fielder show.
Huh.
It's got a Twilight Zone kind of edge in kind of like a more, more complicated version. But like I recommend it if you're a fan of this episode of the Twilight Zone. It has some themes that kind of play out similarly.
Interesting. I thought of wasn't there a movie called Millennium where they all disappeared?
That was like the Langoliers. Okay. It was like there'd be.
Oh, was it? Okay.
If it was a plane was going to crash, these time traveling people would pull all the people off of the flight, and then they would work in some sort of future world, like it was kind of like Metropolis, or not Metropolis. But I mean Metropolis, like the silent movie Metropolis, not Superman.
Right.
Yeah.
Like a all forced labor.
Yeah. If I remember right, I haven't seen it since it was on cable, probably in the 80s or 90s. I love that movie though.
Interesting.
I think it's a fun one. Millennium. Yeah.
So I thought this was a really great episode. I hadn't remembered it and got to kind of discover it along with Bill Pullman and I remembered the thing that stood out to me is this guy's reaction, Gart's reaction at the very end with that abject horror. He reminded me of Jimmy Stewart with like the big eyes, and they're like, oh no.
Yeah. There was
he didn't say that, but
it was big acting, but not in a bad way. Yeah.
Right. It was just freaked out enough. It was almost like you'd expect his hair to turn stark white or something in a Stephen King way or something. But yeah, don't forget the classic jump through the glass of.
Speaking of Stephen King, next week's episode, I feel like, is another one that may have had a little bit of influence on King. What You Need. And then I think, this character is a much kinder, sweeter character than Leyland Gaunt from Needful Things. But I also think that this episode that we're doing next week, it was probably like pinging and ponging around in Stephen King's mind when he wrote Needful Things.
Well, I'm excited to see more about what it is, because it looked a little bit like One for the Angels when I started watching it, and then I'll finish it and see if that still lines up. But right. Is it anything like that or no?
It has a similar vibe, just in that there's a sweet little old man at the heart of the story. It could be a variation on that theme, though, too, in some respects. Okay. It's less about what this man is trying to do and more what he is compelled to do morally. So it will get into that when we get to What You Need next time. Anything else you'd like to say to the listeners before we head out?
Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you more next week.
Me too.